Matthew chapter 17, the what we've been reading through with the navigators and read through the New Testament in a year. First part of that chapter, as we were reading today, talks about the transfiguration of Jesus. And as I was reading today, I was caught by verse 5 of that chapter. It says this, I just want to read it to you. Of course, we know that Peter, James, and John there are with Jesus. Moses and Elijah appear as well. And then we have this, verse 5. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud said this, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." Specifically, those last few words. Of course, this continues kind of Matthew's thing and pointing to who Jesus is, but those last few words seem to catch my eye today. Listen to him. A little bit of a Greek lesson for a moment. That's what we would call a present active imperative. That word listen just simply means that this is a continual command here. That the disciples are being directed at the disciples here to listen to him. The question that I had then was this, is why listen to him? Of course, first and foremost, and we talked about this yesterday a bit, that he is indeed God. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 point that out very clearly to us, that he is the exact representation of God. John chapter 1, the first couple of verses talk about the Word was God. And then yesterday we were talking about the Son given coming from the Father. Jesus is God. He is the Messiah. The other thing that came up was in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, talks about the fact that he paid for our salvation. Why listen to him? Because he bought our salvation for us. That ought to be a very simple reason to pay attention to this, of what he has done for us and how immeasurably great that is. And then I was thinking of Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, of just his person, of being the everlasting Father, the wonderful Counselor, the mighty God, the Prince of Peace. This is his character. And if he is those things, if he possesses the peace and the counsel, the wisdom, the power, shouldn't we listen to him? If he does love us, shouldn't we listen to him? For me and who I am, my makeup, my character, I'm a rule follower, so it's very easy if somebody says, do this, I go out and do it. For others, maybe not so much. I was thinking on that end of the spectrum of why else might we? And I was thinking to 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and the fact at the end of the verse, at the end of the chapter, the Apostle Paul says this. He says, "You were bought with a price." That's verses 19 and 20. We have been freed from the slavery to sin. We've been given victory over spiritual death and ultimately physical as well, as we know that we will be raised one day from the dead, or will be the trumpet will sound and we'll go to be with him. But we're not freed to just do whatever we want. We have become the abode or the home of the Holy Spirit. And in that, we are to live in such a manner as to glorify him. And how do we do that? By listening to Jesus, by listening to the Word himself. Who do we often turn to, though, instead? We often turn to what? To ourselves. Jeremiah says in chapter 17 that the heart is deceitful above all things. Proverbs says the man does what is right in his own eyes. I think of Judges, and time again, the Israelites there being mentioned. They did what was right in their own eyes, and they lived as if they had no king. God was to be their king, but they lived as if they had none. And so we listen to ourselves, but our hearts are deceitful. We do what is right in our own eyes, so that's not something we can trust. We also listen to the world around us, our culture. But our culture doesn't know how to determine what's right and wrong, does it? It's confused those things anymore. Today it's talking about it does, you do what you feel is right. But what we feel is right is deceitful, so how does that work? I was reading an article from J.D. Greer. This was actually last year, talking about how speech itself has changed over the years. And as we listen to our culture and begin to listen to it more than Jesus and what he says through the Word, we begin ourselves to change, and we are not molded and shaped so much into his image as we become an image of the culture around us. And so we need to be careful of that. And then just the other thing of other religions. I hear so much today about living in peace. And yeah, we do whatever we can. Paul says that in Romans, to do what you can to live in peace with all men. But at the same time, there's also standing for the truth, isn't there? And God is truth. His word is truth. Jesus himself, the embodiment, as John says, John chapter 1, the word became flesh. Jesus is truth. And so that's what we need to stand for. That's what we need to listen to. And as we do so, we find our lives being changed. We find hope in the midst of darkness. We find a guide, a light in the midst of everything that's going on. We find counsel, among a number of other things. We find comfort. We find peace in times when there seems there shouldn't be any. And so listen to the word. Doing so, as I often joke that I'm not much of a Joel Osteen fan. He talks about living your best life now, but listening indeed to the word and to Christ, you will find ultimate joy. You will find a life fulfilled. Not by our measure, of course, but as we come to understand Christ and reflect him, what a much, much better way that is. Jesus is God. He is our Messiah. And as such, as God the Father indeed encourages here upon the mountain, listen to him. Until next time, God bless.